and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Good evening and welcome to the Story of Liberty. I'm your host, John Bona, and with me are the regulars. We're here every week. Marshall and Dan, Dr. Marshall Foster and Dan Williamson. Good evening, guys.
Great to be here, John.
Here we go, John.
Here we go. You know, I love starting our program with that clip and from Braveheart. It really gets me pumped. And you know, Christianity, as we see, is increasingly coming under attack in America today. We're going to be talking about separation of church and state. And we see our faith coming under attack from judges and, you know, elected officials, the media, of course, the liberal media, academia, and various activist groups like the ACLU, etc. But these people claim that our Constitution mandates a separation of church and state, which to them means that Christianity can have nothing to do with public life, that God must be separated from government. In their thinking, God is unconstitutional. Now, the men who gave us our Constitution certainly believe that there should be what we'd call a jurisdictional separation of church and state, where these two institutions would not usurp the authority of the other. But this was primarily to keep the state out of the affairs of the church. This did not mean that God should be completely removed from government, or that godly principles, biblical principles, should not shape civil life and law. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, this exclude religion philosophy that is prevailing in America, that religious beliefs should be kept at home and quiet, and that there should be no influence, as an example, from a Christian group or a family or a person in the political process. Now, you guys, I'd like to start by mentioning a couple legal cases out your way, actually. Dan, one in Iowa, not too far from you. And one, of course, a more popular one, probably in California, Proposition 8. Both of these exclude religion views had strong influence in the recent campaigns to persuade the court that, and it was a same-sex marriage argument, and the Iowa Supreme Court decided to impose same-sex marriage on the state of Iowa. And it should be noted that only 25% of people in Iowa supported it. And then the court actually observed that much of society rejected same-sex marriage due to their, you know, sincere, deeply ingrained faith, their religious belief, if you will. But the court also said that these views should not be taken into account. And the court, because the Iowa Constitution says that, and I'll quote, "The General Assembly shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion." In other words, limiting marriage to one man and one woman would be equivalent to establishing a religion. Now, this same argument, Marshall, was made out your way, I think a little later on, and was famously called Proposition 8. And basically, the counsel for, I think it was the ACLU, or it was probably the government, he argued that people may have genuine religious beliefs, and that a marriage that should be between a man and a woman. But he also argued that the other half of the amendment there in California was the Establishment Clause. And it says that a majority is not entitled to impose its religious beliefs on the minority. In other words, listen to this logic. Even though a majority of the people in California voted to define marriage between one man and one woman, they wrongly established a religion. So these exclude religion arguments are wrong because, first of all, marriage is not a religion. And look at when voters define marriage, they're not establishing a religion. And of course, our First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The word religion refers to the church, the people that attend and support the church. Religion, in that sense, means being a Baptist or a Catholic or a Presbyterian or a Jew. It does not mean being married. And these arguments try to make the word religion in the Constitution to mean something different from what it has always meant. Now look at Marshall and Dan, you're going to weigh in here in this, and I'm sorry for being so long-winded. But as you guys know, there's religious reasons behind many of our laws. But these laws do not establish a religion. All major religions have teachings against stealing, but laws against stealing do not establish a religion. All religions have laws against murder, for example, but laws against murder do not establish a religion. And in the same way, when we had laws to abolish slavery, that law wasn't an establishment of a religion. And I think of the great late Dr. Martin Luther King, a Baptist pastor, who preached against racial injustice from the Bible. But laws against discrimination and segregation do not establish a religion. And now we're seeing this direct opposite philosophy is not what the kind of country our founding fathers established. And this direct opposite philosophy from what they meant by free exercise of religion in the First Amendment. You know, and thinking of that, Dan, it makes me think of our first president, how he would react today, George Washington, if he knew what was going on in America.
He would be very shocked because if you, in fact, adopt a pietistic Neoplatonist view, which says that you can't even bring your biblical principles and ethics to bear on the culture in every area, then you frankly would not have our Constitution and our form of government today. And that takes me back to the story. About 1783, George Washington walks in uninvited to his headquarters in Newburgh, New York, and he finds his generals in there upset that their back wages and pensions have not been settled. And if you remember correctly, at the close of the war, the word "not worth a continental" was widely spread because we basically had printed so much money, we really had worthless money and couldn't pay our bills. And so there was this grumbling, and they thought of Washington so highly that they really were looking to make him the king or the dictator to come in and just straighten this whole mess out. And Washington, with 25 years of his life experience of watching the American experiment come to fruition, he says, "Gentlemen, you will permit me to put upon my face my spectacles, for I have grown not only gray, but almost blind in the service of my country." In other words, there will not be a Napoleon. We will not ask for a king. He's taking us back to the book of Samuel where the people ask, we demand a king. And he realizes that people have a tendency when things get tough to want something else or someone else to tell them what to do. Instead of homeschool your children, government educate your children. Instead of being a producer, you become a consumer. Instead of a statesman, you become a statist. Instead of becoming a dominion victor, you become a victim. Instead of having a generational view, you have a short-term view. How do I feed me now? And this really is not the way our nation was structured. Our nation was structured to be ruled from within, not from without. And so Washington, in one fell swoop, as I ask in many history classes, what's the pivotal event in history? And, of course, my students will often say, Gettysburg or the American Revolution or the landing of the Pilgrims. I always tell them it's the day that Washington said no. He understood that if he had said yes, they would have had a king. And everything they had fought, sacrificed, and died for, as he talks about in his farewell address, would have been for naught. And so, yes, he would be aghast that we would throw away our biblical principles and ethics because somehow those can't come to bear on the culture.
That's great, Dan. Thank you for that input. Marshall, by the way, Dr. Marshall Foster, he's the founder and president of the World History Institute. You could find out a lot of information about what we're talking about at worldhistoryinstitute.com, right, Marshall?
That's right. Come and see materials that will take you all the way back and show the biblical foundations, the Christian foundations of America's legal system, of America's laws, as well as our culture.
Great. Well, weigh in here, Marshall. I'd like to hear your comments.
Well, I think that the argument that is being made here in the 20th century, that certainly George Washington wouldn't make, because he said that without religion and without the Bible, you can't really build a firm society. He made that clear in his farewell address, as did many of the founding fathers. But the destruction of the biblical foundations of America's society didn't happen in the 18th century when America was founded. It happened in the mid-19th century when a man became president of Harvard Law School, and it started with Christopher Columbus Langdon, who was an evolutionist who didn't have faith in God, and then it went from there to Roscoe Pond, who in the 1920s went and took the legal foundations of America, which were Christian foundations, which had been accepted for 1,200 years since the day of English common law under Alfred the Great, through Magna Carta in 1215, through all the great legal documents of history. Christianity had been the foundation of all of the legal systems and all of the societies of the West, until Roscoe Pond made this statement. As the Supreme Court justice, he said, the state takes the place of Jehovah. Oh, there it is. What he's saying is there is a new law in the land, and as Charles Evans Hughes, the justice at the time, said, we are the Constitution. We, meaning the 9 justices, he says, the Constitution is what the judges say it is. So what has happened is that the American legal system and the American society and civil government has been taken over by a group of individuals who wrongly think that they can be God on earth. They can determine the laws of the land, and that these 9 men or women who are in the Supreme Court not only make the laws, they determine what the laws mean, and that's why 1 or 2 justices from the Ninth Circuit can rule on destroying what 20 million people say in California, because they're just wiser and smarter, and you can trust me, I'm God. I am the state. And the thing that the American people have not come to grips with is that there is always a religious foundation to our laws. Does that mean that we cram a church doctrine down the throat of every American? No. But there is a religious foundation to every society, and it's whether it is a religion of Hinduism, Buddhism, Marxism, or whether it's simple secular humanism, it will be a foundation for the laws that you have. In America today, what has happened is a small group of secular humanists. Those are those who believe that man, especially the elitist man, the top men, will determine what law is, and they will pass, which it is now, 300,000 regulations that make you guilty of a crime in the nation of America every day. 300,000 regulations are now passed, and they're on the books for you and I to obey. And these laws, passed by secular humanists, now control every aspect of our lives. That is a religious group of laws put on by a group of statists who they themselves are creating the laws. That's what's happened to our Supreme Court, and that's what's happened even in our Congress. As opposed to the way it should be, we should have very few laws, and then the people themselves should be living out their religious convictions. So we don't need a lot of laws on the books. People care for one another, and they care for the needs of others. They don't need to have laws to tell them to be good people or not to smoke. They learn that themselves. But this is a foundational problem, John, that the American people have been duped. We, for the most part, have been sold a bill of goods about the secular society being neutral. And there's no more neutrality than that than there is, the Druids of ancient Ireland killing one another and wearing their heads on their hips. There is no such thing as neutrality.
I hope our listeners are really getting this. I hope you're listening to what Dr. Foster's saying here. In other words, religious or moral reasons that were sincerely held by the citizens of that example I gave in Iowa and California, they were not rational reasons, is what the court's saying. Their votes didn't count because they used religious reasons, which are really Christian principles, to decide their vote. I hope people hear this because it's so obvious what's happening. The majority vote was overturned by the Supreme Court in California. And think about it. This kind of decision is it's kind of like a natural outcome of this exclude Christianity from government view. It simply overrides the will of the people in amending their state's constitution. And that's what happened in Iowa and in California, where you guys are. And I'll tell you, from, almost any perspective of American history, that exclude Christianity is really what it is so wrong. And especially from politics. Look, and Marshall, I'd like you to, or Dan, to weigh in. The very reasoning of our Declaration of Independence, which the United States of America was first founded on, the first two sentences mention God twice in order to say that God's laws, his biblical laws in Holy Scripture, authorized the independence from Great Britain in 1776, and that God is the one who gives human beings the right that government seeks to protect. So in other words, those words, the laws of nature and nature's God, entitle them in the first two sentences, and then that we're endowed by our Creator. So there's no doubt in my mind that the 56 signers of the Declaration, they proclaimed right out in the open that both the laws of nature and God himself gave our country the right to become an independent nation. That's how we were founded. And they're claiming that this, right, Marshall? Go ahead.
Well, that's right. And the Declaration is a culmination of 1,200 years of freedom documents that go all the way to Patrick, actually, but go all the way back from the Mose Libre in the 4th century, all the way through, all to Magna Carta and the Mayflower Compact, up to the Declaration of Independence. And these are covenant documents. What I mean by that is that these are compacts between the people and the ruler, the people and God. And they're saying before God, putting their lives on the line at the end, saying, with firm reliance upon divine providence, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. They're making a covenant before God to hold the king accountable to the over 30 breaking of the covenant that he had with the people. He had broken the covenant so many times that he'd lost his right to rule. And so that's why the people of America denied
the people of America denied the king his authority to. Whoops, we lost everybody.
No, we're there.
John, are you still there?
I'm here. Yeah, we lost Marshall again. Go ahead.
Okay.
You picked right up, though. Good job.
I was just going to say I wasn't sure if we had lost him, but I know what Marshall was going to say there is that with the American people is they told the king that you've breached the covenant between the magistrate and the people, and so you no longer have that right because you've broken the covenant between God, the people, and the king, and then the specific covenant with its own set of rules between the people and the king, so you no longer have the right to govern over us, and that was the reason. And they reached back into books like Vindici contra Tyrannus, books that gave you the biblical and theological reasons to resist the king. And that's, in fact, what happened. I can't help but sometimes draw us back. Sometimes we're talking about they, they the governor, they the jurisprudence, etc. But remember, in the book of Samuel, it's the people that reject God. They're the ones that tell God, no, rather than you be our king, Samuel, you go appoint us a king, because we don't want to deal, Samuel, with your sons who've become a dishonest and perverted in your justice. So we still have this responsibility that really comes to us, the people, to reassert from the bottom up these principles and ethics. And they are people we elect, or then are appointed by people we elect. And so it still comes back to we, the people, choosing to reject God as our sovereign in every area. And this really is the struggle today that's out there. And Marshall puts it together so beautifully when he walks you through history to understand how we got where we are and how we've ventriculated down to the point we are today. And I think that's something we've got to keep our finger on. It still has to come back to us learning to be self-governed, put the Bible to impact each area of our life, and build those kind of principles and morals that push the culture forward. And that's a long-term view.
Right. And it's clear, Marshall will be back in here in a second, that our signers of the Declaration said that the entire purpose of government is to protect the rights that are given to people by God. And that First Amendment is so obvious to the Constitution that declares plainly, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. In other words, or abridging the freedom of speech. And what they meant by establishment of religion was the establishment of a state church. In other words, a government-sponsored or government-endorsed denomination. That the government would not endorse one specific religion, denomination. And the First Amendment, therefore, prohibited the United States from having a state church, such as the Church of England. I think you mentioned that, Dan.
Yep.
And go ahead.
And you want to know something funny? At the state level, though, states had rights to do all kinds of things. If I remember correctly, I think up in Maine, they required that everybody tithe to the Church of Maine, which I think was congregational. So at the state level, you had all kinds of different sovereign authorities, but at the federal level, you were not allowed to establish a federal church over all the states and all the families, etc. So they very much had defined the powers at different levels.
Exactly. And Jefferson, who a lot of people point to, to distort that meaning of the First Amendment, it was really to keep government out of the affairs of the church, not to keep the church or Christians out of the affairs of government. And
that's the great misinterpretation by the Supreme Court when they took the letter to the Danbury Baptists about 1800 and interpreted that to have an invisible wall. That was a bad interpretation. It was a false interpretation.
Exactly. The First Amendment was never intended to guarantee that government should be free from religious influence. We're going to break away, and we'll be right back with the story of liberty.